everyone, I'm Ann Weil from Flax and Twine, where I design projects and patterns for the modern maker. I also wrote the book Knitting Without Needles and the book Weaving Within Reach, and you can find all sorts of goodies over at flaxandtwine.com. I'm really excited to be here today with Yarnspirations to make this amazing chunky cropped V-neck sweater. I call it the Copper Cropper. Just for fun. But it's really a great sweater for the fall. It's cropped perfectly to wear with those cute high-waisted jeans you just got and beautiful chunky soft wool that you're gonna love. And this is the perfect sweater for a new sweater knitter because it's a dropped shoulder style. So it's just straight knitting, very little shaping. It literally is straight knitting except for the ribbing because it's garter stitch. And you'll find it super easy and it's chunky yarn, so it'll go really, really fast. So great first time sweater, but also a quick sweater for anyone who's an experienced knitter. So let's dive in and do it. So the materials for this are really easy, which I love. All you need are these size 17 needles, that's 12 millimeters, and however many balls of this gorgeous Sugar Bush Chill yarn you need according to the pattern. So make sure you print out the pattern because some of the numbers will vary based on what size you're doing. It goes up to 4XL and down to extra small, so fits all types and sizes. And you're gonna love working with this gorgeous thick wool. You also will need a stitch holder to hold some of the parts as we go along. So let's get started. Okay everyone, so we're gonna start by casting on. I'm going to be making size medium, although the photos at the beginning show large. I like to cast on with a long tail cast on, and I do it the way my mom taught me, although you might do it a different way. But I'll just show you my way to start with. So you want to leave enough, probably about a little bit more than a yard in order to do the 44 stitches, and obviously more if you're doing a larger size. But we're going to start with a slip knot. So we just cross it over and pull a loop through. And then we're going to place that slip knot onto our needle. These are size 17 needles or 12 millimeter. And to cast on, the way I learned it was to wrap the tail. I call this tail the cut end, and this I call the working yarn, what goes to the ball. We're going to wrap that around our thumb so it goes across the tail and towards us. And then we put the needle behind that stitch as if we're knitting. We bring the working yarn around the needle and then pull that loop from our thumb over the needle and pull it tight. So again, around the thumb, needle goes in, around, and over. And if you don't have a lot of experience with casting on, Yarnspirations has a ton of tutorials on basic beginning knitting stitches and cast-ons in their library. So definitely go check that out if this is not enough instruction for you for that. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and cast on 44 stitches and then we'll start the ribbing. So now we have our 44 stitches. Those are all cast on, and obviously again, if you're making a different size, you'll have a different number on that needle. This is for size medium. And we're going to start out with a simple ribbing. So this is the only part where we're going to do some purling. It's a 1x1 ribbing. So we're going to start by knitting one. So you bring the needle into the front of the stitch, wrap around the needle, bring the needle through and pull the stitch off. I have a little hook there. Then we're going to bring the yarn in between the two needles for a purl. And we're going to bring the needle this time in front of the left-hand needle. So the right hand goes in front of the left one. We wrap around that right needle and bring the yarn through for a purl. And then we're going to knit. We go to the back, wrap the yarn around, bring the needle off, or the stitch off. Then to the front, bring the yarn around, bring that working yarn through and off. So continue in this pattern in a knit one, purl one pattern to the end. And I'll just show you the next row because it is this even number of stitches for all the sizes. We just flow into that knit one, purl one pattern for the second row as well. So keep going and I'll meet you back here for row 2. All right, so I finished that first row of knit one, purl one of the ribbing, and so I've turned it around, and now you can see that I just continue in this pattern. So I start with a knit one, purl one, and we're gonna do, in all, we're doing 6 rows total of the knit one, purl one ribbing. So simple enough, you just continue to knit one, purl one every row for 6 rows total, and I think that's the same across all the sizes. So go ahead and do your ribbing, and then we'll dive into the body of the sweater. So I finished my ribbing here. I've done 6 full rows, and the next part is just to dive into the knitting, and this is the back. So honestly, this is what's so great about this sweater. It is just straight knitting all the way up to the shoulders. So I'm telling you, get that Netflix show you've been meaning to binge watch and just start knitting. You just dive in after this ribbing and knit, 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 and it's knitting on this side and knitting on the other, and that gives you that garter stitch. So we're gonna go ahead, I think that for my size, it's 18¼ inches that I'm gonna be knitting. It might be 18½. Make sure you check that pattern and check your measurements. And I will come back in a little bit to shape those shoulders. And easy peasy, you guys. One thing I wanted to tell you about, I have changed balls of yarn as I've gone along, but I'm going to show you how I do that here also, just in case you were wondering and maybe you poked ahead a little bit. But I also wanted to show you, you always know that this is the right side of your sweater when this cast on stitch is on the right side. So that kind of helps you orient which side is face up. It can be hard when you're doing garter stitch like this. So when the tail at your ribbing is on the right-hand side, you know that the right side of the garment is facing up. So that's the first thing. Then let's talk a little bit about changing yarn. So I came to the end of my ball here. So I'm going to trim it with about 8 inches left because this isn't going to get me all the way across. I always like to end a ball at the end of a row so you don't have some weird gap or you struggle to hide the change in the middle of a row. And a way to judge in terms of how much length you need is usually about 3 or 4 stretches of your needle, or the width of the garment is what you need to make a whole row of knitting. So that's a good way to judge. To change your ball, you just leave this tail hanging and you hold this here, you put in the needle and you use the new yarn to make a stitch and just keep on going there. And at the very end, I'll show you how to weave in all those ends so that you can't see them. So that's how you do that. And but we're actually at the end here because to measure, you want to measure from the needle when you have it fairly flat, from the needle all the way down to the ribbing. So you see this is 18¼ which is what I am going for here for my size medium. That's 46½ centimeters. And so that means I'm ready to shape the shoulders. So even though I started that new row, I'm going to take that out because we're going to shape the shoulders. All right, so I pulled out those few stitches that we had made because of the yarn change. Of course, I ran out of yarn right at the very, very top, but sometimes that's the way. Now we're going to cast off to start those shoulders. So to shape the shoulders, you do part of it so that there's a little bit of slope to your shoulders, and that adds to the shaping of the sweater a bit. So I knit 1 stitch, and then I'm going to knit the next stitch, and we're going to bind off 6 stitches. So that's 1. So you basically knit 2, and then you take the first one that's on your needle with your left-hand needle and pull it over the one you just made. That's binding off 1 stitch. Then we knit into the next stitch as if we're knitting the row. But we come back and we take the second stitch on the right-hand needle and we pull it over the one you just made. That's 2. 3, 4, 5, 6. So I've cast off 6 stitches at the beginning of the shoulder, and then I'm just going to knit the whole way across the rest of the row. So the shaping of the shoulders takes place over 4 rows. So I'm going to show you each of those parts so that you know how that works. So just knit to the end of the row, and then we'll cast off 6 at the beginning of the next row. Okay, so we finished off our first two rows of that shoulder shaping by casting off 6, finishing, casting off 6, finishing. And now the next 2 rows are doing the next sloping part of the shoulder, and then we'll bind off that center set of stitches for the neck. So for size medium, I'm going to bind off 8 stitches here. Make sure you check the pattern for your number. Okay, so go ahead, bind off 8, finish this row, and then bind off 8 at the beginning of that row and knit back. All right, so now we have all 4 rows of our shoulder shaping done, and the last piece is the neck, and we're just gonna go ahead and bind this off for our center neck. This will match up to the back of our V-neck on the front, and when we come back at the very end, we deal with all these ends. All right, here's the end of my bound off neck. So I've just cut my working yarn and I'm pulling it through the last stitch that was on my needle and tightening that down. And our back is all finished. We're gonna come back at the very end and sew those ends in. So let's set that aside and get started on the front. Okay, you guys, we're doing the front now, and I jumped ahead a little bit on this because it's basically the exact same thing as the back. So what you want to do is you want to cast on, and well, for the medium, you cast on 44 stitches, or however many it says in the pattern for you. And you do that same thing we did with the back, where you knit 1, purl 1, rib for 6 rows total. So that's what we've done here. And then, of course, it's the same as for the back in terms of the first little bit. We're just going to knit straight. So just knit for both rows. Keep knitting on both sides is what I meant. Both sides you knit until you get to the beginning of the V-neck. So for the medium size, that's about 11.5 inches or 11.25 for the medium. And make sure you do it to your size. And then we'll just dive into that V-neck shaping. Can you believe how fast this all goes? We're cruising along. So I've continued knitting on the front, and I think I'm to the point where I start the V-neck. Here's the great thing about crop sweaters is you just don't have to knit a lot before you start like dealing with the neck and everything. So I'm kind of glad they came back. But anyway, here we go. I've got about 11.25, which is what I need to start the V-neck. And to do the V-neck, what we're going to do is we're going to knit halfway, and then we're going to put the rest of the stitches on a holder and just work on shaping one side. Now in a pattern, the way it reads is it says work on left neck. So that might be a little confusing because when you look at it, it's the right hand side of the project. But if you imagine holding this up to you and the right side facing out, this part will be on your left shoulder and will be the left neck shaping. So that's how that works. And some of these stitches fell off the needle, so you never panic about that. You can just put them back on, try not to split those strands. So half of the count of stitches for the medium is 22. So we're going to work 20 to 22 stitches, but we're going to start with this shaping. So we actually, before we start the shaping, we want to knit 19 stitches. So you want to make sure that you go ahead and check that pattern because that's going to be different for whatever size you knit in terms of the number of stitches you want to go before the shaping. So we're going to shape this sweater or this side of the neck with a knit 2 together. And what that does is it tilts the stitches to, when you're looking at it, to the right. And what that does is give a nice detail, a really subtle detail along that neck. We're going to do it a couple stitches before the end. So basically it gives you a border. By doing the decrease a little early, it gives you a border along the edge that looks really pretty, subtle but pretty. So let me go ahead and count how many stitches I have here that I've knit. 2, 4, 6, 12, 14, 15. So I split that one. 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, so halfway across this would be 22. So 19, 20, 21, 22. So this is where the V-neck is going to split, but we're going to go ahead and decrease here by knitting 2 together, and that's what tilts them to the right. We'll do a different kind of stitch on the other side of the neck. So to knit 2 together, you just want to go through 2 stitches as if you were knitting, and then pull that one working strand through the 2 stitches. So there I've decreased 1 stitch, and then I have 1 stitch left. Now I'm just going to be working with these stitches here to do the left side of the neck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the rest of these stitches on a holder. All my holders are busy on other sweaters. Do any of you have like 12 projects going on like me? So I'm going to skip the holder part and this is a little hack, I guess, here. Just going to put them on a pair of circular needles so that they'll get out of the way, and these will hold on to them. It's also kind of nice because you can slide the stitches easily, although this one's split. You can slide the stitches easily on and off with these circular needles. So we're going to slide these 22 stitches, or however many is half of what you cast on, onto the holder. And then we'll go back to the left-hand side of the neck. So the way we shape this, we've done 1 decrease here. And the way this pattern works is we decrease every 4th row. So the way I keep track of that is I've done 1 here. So to me, this is 1, and I'm always going to decrease on 1. And then I just count as I knit along. So the next one is 2, and then you're going to do 3 without, so that's basically, you'll be back at the neck, but you won't shape on 3, and then you'll knit 4, and then we'll shape again. So come back here when you've knit 4 rows, and I'll show you shaping again. And then I'll also show you a little trick for how to look for that decrease if you, for some reason, lose count, which is easy to do when you're, watching your favorite show. So I'll come back here and show the next stitch of shaping. So I've done a couple decreases here, and I stopped here to show you a decrease again, just to remind you stop with 3 left, knit 2 together, and knit 1. But just to show you now, in case you get lost, and just a reminder here, we decreased 1 here, and then this would be 2, 3, 4, then a decrease here in this knit. It's in the divot here. And then, so this would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So you know that this one we just did is a decrease. So you can check from the front in that way, but you can also look back here and see this fat one coming across here. And if you lift it, you can see there are 2 there. So you know that's a double, and there's a fat one here, and that's a double. So there should be a fat one, and then a regular one, and then a fat one. And you can see it here a little bit. This is a fat one with 2. So we decreased, and then we don't decrease. So on the back, they're in the purl bumps that you see them. So we did a decrease here, then we didn't do one here, which is right, and then we did do one here, and then we didn't, and then we did here. So that's a way to just kind of keep track of those every 4th rows. And you want to just keep doing that until you get to however many the pattern says for you to decrease those, however many sets of these you want to do that. And I also give the stitch count that you want to get down to as well at the top, and then we'll shape for the shoulders. Okay, everybody, I'm here ready to shape the shoulder on this left neck, but I did want to just touch briefly on how patterns are written for decreases like this, because I know it can be a little confusing how knitting patterns show how to do this. So if you remember, when we first did it, the first decrease in the pattern is described as part of putting this on a separate needle and all that. So that's kind of a standalone thing where it says, you know, knit a row and decrease it, and then knit 3 rows straight. And then the next section is the repeat section. So basically it shows you how to decrease, and it'll only show you the ones that are really straightforward, that's exactly the same way. So in this case, it says to do the decrease and then knit 4 straight. And then it says do that some number of repeats after that. So for this size, it was 5 times more. For different sizes, it would be different. But so then when you're counting, basically you have that first one, then you have the second one to set up the repeat, and then it says to do it 5 times more. So it would be 1, 1, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then again, the last one, because it's part of the shoulder shaping, is going to be part of a different set of instructions. So that's why there are 8 decreases total to make this neck, but it's broken up into 3 different sections. The initial one, the setup for the repeat, and then the repeat, and then this shaping shoulder part. So here we are on this shaping shoulder part. So it basically says to knit along and then knit 2 together, and then knit 1. And now's the time to just go ahead and check that you have the right number of stitches on. And in the shape shoulder part, after the last decrease, it tells me I need 14 stitches, and 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 stitches. That's what I have, so that's good news. And basically the next set of directions says to knit back this way, and then we'll bind off the sets of stitches kind of similarly to the way we did the back. So I'm going to knit this, and then I'll come back and bind off those shoulder stitches with you. So we finished the first 2 rows of the shaping section, which included that decrease and then knitting the way back. And now we're binding off 6 stitches. For me, it's 6 for size medium. Check your number. And the same goes with the number of stitches remaining. That would vary also depending on what size you have. So make sure you're following along with that pattern. That's 2, 3. So this casting off is just like the back. It's going to match up to the back. 4, 5, 6. So we've got that 6 cast off, and then we're going to knit to the end. Now for this 4th row of the shoulder shaping, we're going to knit to the end of the row, and then we're just going to bind off the remaining stitches. So here we are, we're going to bind off the remaining stitches, and then we're going to go ahead and move over to shaping the right hand side of the neck, which is almost the same way, but we're going to just do our decrease a little bit differently. And we're going to finish this off the same way with that loop and pulling a cut end through our last stitch. There's a little knot in my yarn here, and so it's poking through. So I'm going to just push this back to the other side, to the wrong side of the fabric. So if you end up with a little knot, sometimes you'll find that in a ball. You can just try and get that on the other side. Here we're going to cut this and pull this through. All right, so we have our first shoulder shaping done, and we can go ahead and move to the right-hand side of the neck. So the first step in that is we're going to transfer these stitches back on to our needle, and we want our needle to end up at the middle of the neck because that's where we're going to start. So you want to start from this end to get these back onto your needle. So do that and come back and we'll dive into that neck. Okay, so here we are at the right neck shaping, and this actually starts right here in the middle, and we dive right into that first decrease. So it's the first 3 stitches again. We're going to add the yarn, we're going to just let that tail hang at the back. We're going to knit 1, just hold that yarn at the back. So we knit 1, and now we'll weave that in later. But now we're going to decrease through SSK. SSK stands for slip, slip, knit. So let me show you how you do this. So you're going to pretend you're going to knit this next stitch, but you're going to just slip that stitch off the left-hand needle onto your right. And then you're going to do that with the next stitch. You're going to pretend you're going to knit and slip that stitch off your left-hand needle onto the right. And then to decrease, you're going to stick that left-hand needle in the front of both of those stitches. And then you're just going to knit as if you were normally, but you're going to pull the working yarn through those 2 stitches and off. And what that does is you can see it kind of tilts that decrease to the left, which will give us this nice line up the left-hand side of our neck. So that's the first decrease there. And then we're going to knit to the end. And it's the same on this side where you decrease every 4th row. But the pattern's written a little differently because of the way the decreases fall and the neck shapings fall. All the decreases are provided in one instruction here. So we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to repeat those 4 rows 7 more times so that you have the same number of decreases that you had on the right-hand side. So it's the same thing. Every 4th row you do that decrease with the SSK, and I'll meet you back up for the shoulder shaping. So here we are at the end of our right neck shaping. We started with that SSK and then did it every 4 rows 6 times. So that was that initial one, 6 more times, that's 7 total, and now we have 1 left. This is the 8th, but it's part of the shaping shoulders directions. So we're going to start with this 1 more decrease here with just a knit and then an SSK, so slip, slip, knit, and then I want you to knit to the end of the row. And then the shaping on this shoulder is a little different in that you want the shapings from the right to the left to match, and we want to start from the outside and slope up this way. So instead of binding off on the right side of the garment, we're going to bind off on the left side of the garment. So we're moving from we're actually going to be binding off on the wrong side of the garment. So I'll show you that in a second. So here we are at the end of this row, and this is the side we're going to bind off on so that we're moving from the outside to the inside and having those slopes match up. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to bind off 6 stitches here, and obviously that number varies depending on what size you're making, so double check that pattern. And even if you're doing the size I'm doing, check the pattern. You never know when I make a little mistake here or there. So that's 2. gosh, are you feeling the excitement? We're almost done with the front. I am. Okay, so that's 6, and then you're just going to knit to the end of the row. So it should be 8 left there. And then again, because we want that same slope, we're going to knit this stitch on this side so that, oh, this got tangled up. So knit this row on this side so that the slope continues on the from the outside of the garment in towards the neck. And here, now we're binding off our remaining stitches. And you just continue to do that in that knit because the whole garment is knitting. So we just bind that off in that same knitting way, but just on the wrong side of the garment or the fabric. And when we get to the end, we will just pull that cut end through the loop and we'll dive into the sleeves. Sleeves can be a bear because you think you're almost done and then you got the whole sleeve to do, 2 sleeves to do. But it goes pretty fast because they're shorter because of the drop shoulder. So that's nice too. Oops. Okay, so we have that last stitch bound off. We're gonna make that loop, cut an end here, and bring the end through the loop. And there, we have, this is the wrong side, but we have our sweater front. So let's set this aside. We'll weave all these ends in at the end and let's get started on those sleeves. So we're diving into the sleeve here, and I already got a little jump start here. I cast on 20 stitches for medium, and that will vary depending on your size. So you cast on your number of stitches and then you dive right back into that same thing we did on the back of the sweater and on the front, which is a knit 1, purl 1 ribbing for 6 rows. So that's the exact same as we did on the other one. It just depends on how many stitches you have to cast on. So once we get to the end of those 6 rows, we're going to just dive into knitting again. And on this sleeve construction, it starts out with just a stretch of straight knitting, so no increases yet. And depending on your size, that will determine how many rows of straight knitting you do. For my size, it's 8 rows of straight knitting on this sleeve before the first increase. So go ahead and do those 8 rows of knitting, and then I will come back and show you how to do that increase. We increase here at the beginning and the end, and it's a very special kind of increase, different than well, you might have seen it before, but it's one I like for this sweater. So I'll come back after, for me, 8 rows. For you, it might be a different number, but then we'll do those increases. Okay, so now we've done that first 8 rows in our sleeve. So here comes our increase. And remember, if you're doing a different size, you might start out with a different number of rows, but we're going to start with that increase. And to do that, we're going to do what's called a knit into the front and back. So that means in this one single stitch on the outside, we're going to knit as if you normally would, and we're going to pull the stitch through, but we're not going to pull this loop off the left hand needle, because in this one stitch, we're going to knit into it again, but we're going to knit into the back of it. So you go from being your needles up front here, you bring it to the back of the left, and then you go through this back loop back there. And then we're going to knit around there. So you see it from the front. And so we pull a stitch through there. So in that one stitch, we knit 2 stitches. Here's that one little V, and then here's 1 stitch, and here's 2 stitches. So that's how we do it. I'll knit to the end and show you one more time. And I'll explain just here as I go. This sleeve is the same thing where it's like you have an increase row and then you knit a certain number of rows depending on your size. So for the large, you increase for a row and then knit 7 more rows. So there are 8 rows total in every round of increase. So you'll then repeat those 8 rows a certain number of times based on the size. And I always provide the stitch count that you should have at the end. So that's a great way to check and make sure you've done the right number of sections. You also can count the number of repeats and figure out how many rows total that would be, and double check that you've included all your increases and the required number of rows that way as well. Lots of ways to double check. So, and you would also measure your sleeve at the end and make sure you have the right length sleeve. Those numbers are in the diagram in the pattern. So here we are, we've come to the last stitch in the row, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to knit into the front of the stitch. So this is just like you were knitting regularly, but instead of pulling this stitch off the left, we're going to leave it on. So here's what looks like that one normal stitch. Then we're going to move the needle to the back and go through the back loop of that stitch that's still on your left-hand needle. So now that's coming off, and there we now have 2 stitches in that last stitch. So that's how we're increasing those stitches. And when you do that, it makes it so that you don't have gaps or holes in those increases. So that is the first row of my increase, and now for this size I do 7 more rows and then I do an increase again. And so go ahead and do that, and I'm going to come back. It's basically very repetitive. You do that repeated set of 8, the given number of times, and I'll come back when the sleeve is almost done and ready to wrap up. And I'll show you another way to try and see these so you can count them as well. Okay, so I have one of my sleeves here and it's ready to be bound off, but I just wanted to walk you through double checking those increases and how to spot those and count them so you can double check your pattern as you go along. So if you remember, we had that ribbing, that set of ribbing, and then that first set of straight knitting. So that was 8 rows up to here. And then if you kind of bury into the fabric right here, you can see this little pearl knob sticking out. That shows us that was where our increase was. And when it's flat, you can't see it. But if you separate it, you can kind of see that that's where our increase was. So that's how we can check. So we had that first set of straight 8, and then we had this section where we described that we're going to increase in the front and the back and do 8 rows. So that was our first descripting section in the pattern. And then we said you're going to repeat that 5 more times. So here's our next one. That's 1, 2, here it is here, 3, 4, and this is 5 up to here. And then to close out, it repeats it one more time, but has however many rows you need to complete to get to the end of your sleeve. So this is the last increase, and then for me, for my size, it said to knit 3 more rows. But that number of rows that you finish your sleeve with will vary depending on your pattern, as will how often and how many increases you'll have. So definitely check the pattern, but that's how to track those increases through your sleeve. And so the last part here is just to bind off the sleeve, and you just do that straight across. So go ahead and do that. And then the nice thing is the second sleeve is exactly the same as the first. So do that second sleeve and come back here and I will show you how to weave in ends, because there's a little bit of that to do, and then we'll start to seam the sweater up. We're almost done. Okay, so we're all ready to weave in our ends. So I'm going to show you how to weave these 2 ends in, and then you can just repeat that through all your pieces. So this is the right side of the sweater, and here's the edge. And I'm just going to flip this over, and I like to work from right to left, so I spin it around here. And I'm going to put this on a darning needle. And what we're going to do is we're just going to follow the lines of these stitches that are here. So I have this end here. I'm going to follow along with this stitch right here. and it goes up through here. And by doing this, it not only like hides the ends, but it really kind of secures them. This stitch goes underneath this loop, over, and then back down this loop here. So if I just follow along in the stitch pattern, so I go back under this loop, and it goes back into this one we came out of. If we follow along with this stitch pattern, then on the front, you won't be able to see it at all. So see, this one loops around here and goes through this one, and then it goes through this one. And then we're going to come around and come up the top of the, we're matching this loop here and then coming back down here. So really you don't need a lot. If you do 2 or 3 stitches, that's plenty to keep that end secure. So here I've done this one, and that's, you can barely even see it even on the back, which is really nice. And you can just come in and trim that close to there. And we're going to go ahead and do that with the other one as well. We're going to come in, and sometimes it's tricky to know where to start, but I am just going to come up here and come right under these 2. And then once I get it up there, I'm going to then follow along this stitch. This kind of goes under the doubled one over here, and then back up the same one we came down. So this one's kind of going the opposite direction, whereas this one was pointed, the first one we did go doing up, this one we're kind of going down. And then back around, just like that. So I'm going to spread this apart here so it's not too taut. You want them just kind of resting where the stitches normally would. I'm going to trim this, and then you'll see from the other side, it doesn't even look like there were ends there. So that's perfect. So go ahead and do that to your front, your back, your sleeves. Just weave in all the ends, and then we'll dive into seaming. Okay, so at this point you should have all your ends woven in, and what you want to do is turn your back side up so that the right side is facing down, and the wrong side, so the one where you wove in your ends, and I can tell like I wove in my hip end here, and there's a couple other places where I wove ends in, that is facing up. And then we're going to put the V-neck part on top of it, so the right side is also, so the right side is facing up. So the right side of the bottom is towards the table, and the right side of the top is facing up. So it would be like when you put it on, right? So that's the right side, and this is the right side. And we're going to start by seaming together the shoulders, so that once we do the shoulders, then we have room to do the arms. So I'm going to turn this around here, and you can see these bound off edges match up. And the way I like to join the edges is by doing a mattress stitch. Actually, I'm going to turn it this way and bring it facing me here. So the way I do this mattress stitch, and what you can do is bring in, you can weave this end into the back so that it's secure. You do that the same way we did the ends. Although I'm just going along the line of the purling at this point. So, and then because this is on the inside, I'm just gonna go, let's see, I think I'm just gonna go back the way I came to secure this. Not exactly, because you don't want it to pull out. Okay, so that's secure in there. And we're gonna come up the top. Take this up the top. Okay, so now that end is secure in the back of the fabric. And basically what I want to do is lift off this cast off edge and find the V's under here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go underneath the V here on this side. If you see this V right here, it's right above this purl line and right underneath the cast off edge. And on this side, it's a little bit easier to see those V's. So I'm going to go under, you can see the V here and the V here. I'm going to go under the V on this side and pull that through. And basically what happens is the ends start to kiss together and it brings the seam into the inside of the sweater. So this got caught up a little bit, but you can see the next V is right here in between that bound off edge and the purl. And then over here, this is the next V on this side, right there. So we're going to go underneath that. On that side. And come back over to this side. This is the trickier side. And this one has got, I must have split the yarn there. So I'm just going to go under that V. And then under over here. And here you can see it right there. Over here. Then over here. And what that does is it brings those edges together and pulls the seam to the inside. So I'll show you what I have so far. You can see that it creates this line here that looks like a purl along the edge of the seam, and then it just looks kind of seamless as you go over. So continue to do that all the way across these pieces. So match up when it bumps up to the next row of shoulder shaping, just match that up and keep going. And then we'll do the other side. Okay, so here we are with this finished seam thing. You can see this is the seam where that first bind off met, and then it kind of forks out here, and because we did that extra row, so then here is the line where they meet up for that second bound off edge. And here we are at the neck, and you'll see there's this little kind of, because it goes up another row to finish the neck, you want to just secure this in a way that pulls it together. So I'm going through the edge of the bound off with the edge of my shoulder, and I'm just going to stitch that together so that when I weave this end in here, so I'm going to take this over and I'm going to just weave into the seam. There's so much room for you to weave these edges in here into the seam of the shoulder underneath. So I'm just going to do that a few times and clip it. But you can see that by doing that extra stitch joining the neck to the front shoulder, it makes that nice curve here, and you want to do that on both sides. So go ahead and do the same shoulder seaming over here, and once you've done that, come back and I'll show you how to seam on the sleeve. We're almost done, you guys. All right, so we now have our shoulder seam together. So that's all set and it's looking nice at the neck. The neck sides are kind of melded into these shoulders nicely. We're gonna move on to the sleeves. Now, the best way to do the sleeves, I find, is to mark the midpoint here and start here at the midpoint up on the shoulder. Because I've done a lot of sleeves where you start on the edge and stitch it on to the body of the sweater, and you'll end up with one side 1 inch lower than the other, and it'll drive you crazy. So if by starting in the middle you eliminate some of that possibility and stress of having those uneven. So we're going to do this, and we're going to just put a little marker here in the center. And you can do this by eye. You don't necessarily need the marker, but I'm going to just do this to illustrate it to you. And it's really, if you look at it, it's really this space just next to the marker. So it'll really be this stitch right here because this is the midpoint. So here, why don't I move this? Right, I can just stick it with my fingers right under here. So there's that midpoint. And we're going to turn our sweater around and open it up. So I'm going to bring the sleeve over to the side of the sweater, and I'm going to line up this center stitch with the center of the shoulder seam. And the sleeves then will come down the sides more evenly. So first I'm going to run this line through the shoulder seam. So this is what I'm going to seam the sleeve to the body with. So I'm going to just run that end in here and have it come out kind of right here in the middle where the seam is. And I'm going to come over to this side of the sleeve and go right underneath where that center point is with the white tie. And then I'm going to remove that marker. And you don't need the marker. You can kind of fold it and then judge it. But once we have that midpoint to midpoint, then when you come on this side, you're not going to have any V's to go under. You kind of have to rely on these bars that are in between the V of the stitches. So here you have the V, and if I stick my needle through the B, the center of the V, and pull this bar out, that's what I want to go underneath. So I'm going to go underneath that on that side, and then over here I'm going to pick up that cast off edge, and I'm going to find that V underneath that cast off edge right there. I'm going to go underneath that. After I've done the V on this side, I'm going to go over here and go under the purl stitch, this purl bar right here. And then under the V on this side. And you can see how that's coming together. And basically, you want this to gently seam on to the body without like bunching or pulling a lot. So sometimes you may have to adjust how you're stitching based on how that's going. But you just generally try and keep that sleeve relaxed and attached. So you can see here that I went under the purl stitch here, and I think if I go under the bar here, that's going to start to get it too scrunched up. So I'm going to skip one and go under down here. So just generally watch your tension on these attachments so that you're keeping kind of an even pull on the sleeve, the side of the sleeve. So go ahead and do this side, and I'll show you wherever we match up. We can count the number of rows, and then we'll match up on the other side. So do that and then meet me back here. Okay, so the first thing you want to do when you finish sewing one half of the arm sleeve on is just check the measurement. So you'll see in the diagram, it'll have kind of the whole length of the arm sleeve, what it should end up with. And half that measurement will be how far down your arm sleeve should go. So this was 17, the whole top of the arm sleeve was 17 inches. So I know that this part of my armhole should be 8.5 up to the shoulder seam, which it is, 8.5 right up to there. And then what you want to do once you're happy with where that is, because if you are like half an inch off or something, you can futz with it down here or the last 4 stitches to stretch it to where you need to go. But then you turn it over and you can just bring that yarn that you use to attach those through the seam of the arm, where the arm's attached to the body, and just clip it there. And then you want to come back here and do the same, attaching this to here. And if you want, one thing you can do to kind of ensure that you end up with that 8.5 is go from the shoulder seam down 8.5, and it does line up right here. So you may want to start here and then seam this way, because I always like to seam from right to left anyway. So go ahead and attach this, and then attach the other arm. And then we've got one more thing to show you about seaming the underarms and the sides, and then we'll be wrapping up. All right, so we have our sleeves attached now, and this is the last part, is this just long seam up the side of the sweater and then down the sides of the sleeves. And I'm gonna get you started over here, and then you can keep going because it's pretty much the same. And it's still the mattress stitch, only it's side to side, not bound off edge to side. So this is more, we've done 3 different kinds, right? We've done bound off edge to bound off edge at the shoulders. Then we've done bound off edge of the sleeve to side on the sleeve, to attach the sleeves. And then this mattress stitch is bound off side to bound off side. I mean, not bound off, but edge side to side, as opposed to including any bound off edges in there. So this one's just going to be side to side mattress stitch. And to do that, we still look for those bars. In this case, I'm going to go into the purl bars in the ribbing to attach these. And it's even easier once we get out of the ribbing component here. So we got through that ribbing part, and you can see it just looks kind of like another ribbing divot on the side here. So, or a purl divot here. So that looks good. And now what we want to do is we just want to match up these purl rows and knit rows row for row. So we're going to go under the purl stitch on this side, and then the purl stitch on this side. That's the bumpy part. And then we're going to go under that knit bar on this side, which is right here. That's the bar in the middle of the V. And then we're going to go under the bar on this side, right there. And then we're back to the purls. That bump sticking up, and then the purl on this side. And we do this all along this seam and then along the edge of the sleeve. So I'll show you how. So you can see that just kind of will match up those lines across as you go all the way up. And here you want to just try and match up your increases so that they match along on the way down as well. So go ahead and do this part, this seam, and then do the other side, and I will meet you back here with your finished sweater. Yay! Congratulations, everyone. You finished your crop V-neck sweater, and I hope you love it, and I hope you love the process. Maybe this is the first sweater you ever made, and if so, huge congratulations. I'm so excited for you to add this to your fall wardrobe, so go grab that favorite pair of jeans, grab a cup of tea, throw your sweater on, and get cozy. I have really enjoyed being here with you today for Yarnspirations.com and for flaxandtwine.com. And if you want any more projects, patterns, or more information, check both of those sites out, and you'll be busy all fall. Talk to you soon.